With that being said, Emma, I'm going to put you in a spotlight here so everyone can see you for a second. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome again. Thank you for joining us. Um, Good to have you on here. It's been a long time coming.
Yes, thank you. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah. Are you in Tokyo right now?
Yes, I'm in Tokyo.
Cool. Thanks for spending your Friday morning with us. Um, so I'm going to give a quick intro here for so that those of you who maybe don't know Emma's story. Emma is from Kobe in Japan, born to a Japanese mother and a British father, half Asian like me. She lived in Japan until moving to New York to attend NYU's renowned Tisch School to study documentary filmmaking. Um, from that, she got to work on a bunch of cool documentaries for major networks like CNN, Al Jazeera, HBO, NHK, etc. And then completed her first full feature-length film called Monkey Business: The Adventures of Curious George's Creators. That was in 2017 and received worldwide acclaim. Won the Audience Award at the Nantucket Film Festival. And following that film success, she moved back to Japan to be able to tell her stories from a unique perspective on the ground in Japan. She completed projects on Ichiro, which hopefully a lot of you have been able to see, uh, Olympic sports in Japan, and the Japanese artistic director at the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. But of course, most importantly, she also completed the film that we're here to discuss, Koshien, Japan's Field of Dreams, which she started in 2018, premiered in New York City in 2019, and then this year, ESPN picked it up, as a lot of you I know caught it earlier this year, and then of course, recently, a few weeks ago in North America, it's now available to everyone and has gotten a great reception, I know, from our community and the greater film community, baseball fans and non-fans alike. So Emma, congratulations on the success with the film, and thank you again for spending the time with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to chat.
Cool. So I just want to start it off going back to growing up in Japan. What was your baseball background, and what was your first experience with the Koshien tournament?
Right. So I actually grew up, 15 minutes away from the Koshien Stadium in the same city, the Nishinomiya city. And but not that I went. Like I like to say that as though it's like some association by distance, but it's not like I was going, but it was a very familiar thing, for Hanshin Tiger games, and also every spring and summer there would just be dominant high school baseball communities coming, and it was a field of dreams for so many, but for me it was just a thing that was not in my immediate neighborhood, but very close to where I lived. And I would say my baseball entry was really not high school baseball. It was Ichiro. So when I was 11 years old, I read a book about him in school. So you could pick a book to read for the holidays, and I picked that book. Until then, I had no idea who he was, no interest in baseball or sports, and that book changed my life. It was just a book about his life. At the time, he was about to go to the majors, and it was a book that showed that since he was 3 years old, he practiced baseball every day with the hope of becoming the best. And that inspired me to realize I have to find something I love, something that will become my baseball, and then just dedicate myself to it like he did. And so I spent my middle school years really actively looking for that thing, which I picked to be filmmaking. And at the time, it was very easy to work hard because my hero, Ichiro, was being so successful in the US. And there was this model that was succeeding because of all his hard work. And so for me, it was like, I just thought, okay, so I will work hard too. And then one day go to the US, just like he did, and study and try to be a good filmmaker. So really my life is thanks to him. And I always also knew that baseball can be used not just to enjoy the game itself, but to kind of have parallels to bigger themes like how to live life. And I think that's why this film, the Koshien film, even though it's about baseball, I picked the topic because I knew I could kind of have a bigger theme about, like I could say more about society and life. So that's kind of and so through Ichiro, I went to the US many times. You know, my family's from England. I never had a relationship in the US, but I would go to Seattle. My parents kind of got bored of Seattle after a few trips, so then we would kind of tour with the Mariners. And so like Florida and California in the 2003, 4, 5, that area. And then yeah, when I went to New York, you know, I would watch when Ichiro came to the Yankees, I watched almost every home game, which was intense for 2.5 years. But that was kind of my way into baseball. And yeah, through him, I would not say I'm a fan of any team, really, honestly. I just kind of he was my life. He is my life. So yeah.
Wow. So you mentioned this, but I just want to go back to it. So do you think you would not have gone to NYU or at all, or gone to the US if Ichiro hadn't gone? That was your inspiration for wanting to do that?
I think looking back, I always knew I wanted to study in a place where I felt like whatever industry I was going into is the best. And that came from the fact that, you know, Ichiro was the best in Japan, yet wanted to challenge himself where he thought baseball was best in the US. So I wouldn't say it was the definitive reason, but and I looked at many different schools in different countries. But ultimately, I just felt like, yeah, I mean, for me, filmmaking, the US is the best. And so going there was a simple thing. And also I'd never been to the US before moving there except to see Ichiro play. So I feel like it just helped me familiarize with the country. So yeah.
Cool. Oh, what was your reaction when the Yankees picked him up?
I remember I was like in a meeting or something, and when I came out of the meeting, I looked at my phone. I had like 40 friends congratulating me. I didn't know what it was about. So it was like everybody associated me with him. So I just couldn't believe it. And especially that first half season from July onwards, where we all thought he was going to move very quickly. I was, you know, spent so much time at the stadium, and when I was walking in New York, I would assume I could always bump into him. So I was always on best behavior. I mean, I still try to be, just as a model fan, you know, always act in a way that, you know, if Ichiro was to see me, he would, you know, I would make him proud, you know. That's always a motivation. But yeah, so there was a lot of that, especially during those years where I never bumped into him or anything. I've never met him, you know, to this day, except to get an autograph. But yeah, so it was a very exciting 2.5 years. Yeah.
Cool, cool. So moving on to the Koshien part. So at what point did you realize that this is the project I want to do and I want to do a full-length film on it?
Yeah, so as you kindly introduced in your introduction, I had spent, you know, 9 full years in New York, and it was after I finished my first film about the authors of Curious George, a very different animated documentary from Koshien, that I started to really realize that I wanted to start coming back to Japan, not fully live here, but I thought maybe what I could do uniquely or more than others was to tell stories about Japan for the outside world. And I felt that was lacking. You know, that you hear a lot about sushi and ramen and, you know, anime and Hello Kitty, and that's kind of it. And I just felt like there's more to where I grew up. And I would also say when I was growing up here, I didn't necessarily like Japan. I just felt I had all these complexes, you know, not being fully Japanese. I just didn't feel fully comfortable. But after I left, and those years in New York really made me realize how wonderful some of Japanese things are, you know, things like trains being on time and people queuing up for things and people being considerate, and just things I took for granted that were not the case in New York. And that made me start to realize all the other things about Japanese society that actually are quite wonderful, and also its issues, of course. But I wanted to find something that could capture all of that in a way that's also dramatic and with great characters. And so I came back to actively look for that arena. And when I stumbled upon the 99th Koshien in the summer of 2017, it was the first time I was in Japan in the summer of almost a decade. And you know, as I usually all must know, it's like you can't avoid it if you're in Japan. And it was also shocking that as an adult, I would go to these meetings and the other people would not turn the TV off. It was like, no, we're gonna have the game on while we have this very serious meeting. So it just made me remember how it encapsulates the summer. And I thought, oh, it's the 100th tournament. Like maybe that's a great opportunity to look back on where Japan has come from in this, you know, especially since the war, and also where it might be headed. There's always a lot of criticism also about high school baseball, and I was hearing that as well. So I just thought it was a good topic to dive into.
Got it. So when or how did you originally meet Mizutani Kantoku, and what was your pitch to him to get him to agree to follow his team around for so long?
Yeah. So yeah, there's like almost 4,000 schools. So where do I pick? What do I do? It was the big question, and I wanted to make sure that our film connected to Japanese major leaguers somehow, because I thought that would be a good way to get the US based audience to be interested. And then also I was interested in the Yokohama area because baseball, that's where baseball came in Japan. And although there's not that much about history in the final film, there was a time when I was very interested in doing a lot more about how like baseball became yaku or yakudo and then yaku. So that was our kind of our rubric. And then actually in our film, there's that post-war kamikaze coach Tsuta, who was a coach in the 70s and 80s that was a coach at Ikeda High School. So his grandson is a filmmaker, kind of like in my generation, and my husband and producer Eric knew him from before. So we're like talking to a lot of people about, you know, getting advice, and he was the one that knew Mizutani because he was from his hometown and from Tokushima. So we, being the grandson of this very famous legendary coach, like within 2 days we had a dinner set up with Mizutani, and he was so charismatic. And then once I went to his school, and it's just like the intensity that you feel at Hayato, like you waltz in there on a regular like Wednesday afternoon, and you arrive at the school's grounds, and it's not you can't waltz anymore. It's so intense. It's almost like a war zone. Like it's so intense, and I was captivated by this atmosphere. And then once I realized that his son, you know, he coached. His disciple is Sasaki, who is Otani's coach, and his son was gonna go there. I thought, wow, this could be a great story. And he didn't really take that much convincing on his own. And I think he likes, you know, having, you know, good media means good things for the baseball program. He always told me later that he said yes, assuming I would never be able to do this film, because it was quite tough for the high school baseball union and different parties to agree to let us do it. So and I don't think he also realized I would be there every day, like for many months. I think he just said and so later he always tells me like he just like said yes without really thinking about it. And but to his credit, stuck with it. He never said go away now, and that's why we were able to make that film. Sasaki, the other coach, was much harder to convince. You know, he has everything he needs without extra media. All the best kids from Iwate Prefecture, which is where he only takes kids from the local prefecture. So he doesn't need to do anything to attract those kids. And at first he was like, why do I need to share things I've learned about how to coach my baseball team with anyone? Which is a valid point. And as a filmmaker, you always have to find a reason for the other person, the people, to want to participate. And ultimately I said, you might not need this, but maybe it would be nice for you to be documented within history. And also, I think what you're doing here is just like, will be such a hint for every other educator in Japan and maybe in the rest of the world. It's not just about coaching baseball, and, you know, please contribute to the future of Japanese society is ultimately how I convinced him. And it took some time and a few trips where we really couldn't film anything. And then basically he at one point let his guard down. So
that's a great argument. It's hard to say no to that.
yeah.
So did the coaches, did you ever get the feeling that like singling out players and focusing on individual stories, did they ever feel that it was conflicting with the kind of harmonious wholeness of the team?
Yeah, the coaches never told me like, you know, make sure you're balanced or things, but I definitely, just to have a successful atmosphere with the whole team, I had to make sure we did a lot of things. I mean, first of all, to even cast, like if it's like was a casting process, and I knew I wanted to film the seniors mainly, but there were 49 seniors in Hayato that year. And so, and in the spring, I think I did a full interviews with over 30 of them, because I would get to know them, and some of them are not into it at all, which is fine. And then they were, but then some kids could speak very well even if the cameras were rolling, and other kids couldn't, and so I would give each person a few tries. And if no matter how wonderful of a kid in the film, you just have to be able to express yourself, so like kind of whittling things down. And then but even until the day of the team announcement, when Ryumon is not picked, even at that point, I would say we had like the 6 full characters we could have fully put in a film. So we were filming a lot of kids. And after that, when I realized, basically Captain Ryumon, the freshman mentor who has a role, and those were really the 3. We kept filming with other kids, knowing that like they weren't really going to be, maybe if we one day made like a longer series or something, it would be useful, but just to keep up, like kind of lowering the pressure for the kids we were filming, and just making everyone feel like they're still involved, because you never know, like it's until the end, if someone hit the hit that would get Hayato to Koshien, they would be in, right? So I was always kind of, and also just talking, even if I wasn't filming, to make sure everybody felt comfortable with us there. We had to become like air. I keep saying we could never be air. We were a huge crew, and I had a huge, like a 6-foot cameraman, who was American in this very Japanese environment. But our goal was to become like part of like, this chairs, there's tables, and then there was us, so that when they lost or when they didn't make the team, they wouldn't be embarrassed that we were there. It was just so normal that they would be okay to just be how they were going to be. That was our goal. So from the spring, we just filmed endless things that you will never see because it was not that interesting, but all for those kind of important moments.
Wow. Well, I commend you for that. You did an amazing job, but hearing you talk about it now, it makes you realize there's so much more that has to be done. Like, I'm sure it's just a tiny portion of what you captured is what we saw, but there's so much strategy there, which nice work. And
we filmed 300 hours, and it's wow. a 94-minute film. We also filmed with 2 other schools that were not in the film at all, because we just didn't know who would make it to Koshien. So we couldn't have a film that, and I think you because you all love baseball, you might know about this film that was made maybe 15 years ago called Koko Yaku, that was on PBS, which I think is maybe the other high school baseball film, which it's good, but neither of the teams make it to Koshien at all. And I think that was the huge miscalculation, because this one team constantly makes it, and it's just not the same. I just didn't want to do that. We had to make sure one of our teams made it to Koshien, even if I felt like after that it didn't have to win Koshien or anything, but just that, what that significance. And so we had to, and ultimately it worked out. But top of the 9th inning for Hanamaki, when they were losing in that final of the regionals, I was like, first of all, we never expected Hayato to lose in the first round, so there was a lot of freakouts for me too. But it ultimately worked out. We made the story based on the results. So.
Well, I'm relieved for you. I wasn't even going through it, and I just feel relieved that they made it. I got one more question before we do some audience ones. So when I was watching the film with my wife, Jessie, she was like appalled at how Mizutani treated his players, and how he prioritized his job over his family, etc. And can you explain, like, where on the spectrum does he fall as far as how strict and dedicated to his job he is?
Yeah, I would honestly say he's above average in his strictness, but definitely not the most extreme or strict coaches that even I witnessed in the 1 year where I visited other teams. I also saw a lot of other coaches through practice games that Hayato went to. So, maybe there's an impression that I picked like the strictest coach, but there were much coaches that were even scarier. And even I remember one of the like a player from a different team that we just visited to film a practice game, saying like the rule of that team was like, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, you have to run at full speed. So if you get up and you need to go to the bathroom like 5 a.m. or whatever, you have to just get up and run to the bathroom. This type of and he was like, yeah, so Hayato looks like, I know they have to be proper, but it seems like easy kind of a thing. And I was very surprised. But I would say in terms of And I think, yeah, we didn't pick like an outsider for about the kind of the baseball culture. His dedication, I think, is pretty normal. I mean, but maybe it's particular because I don't know how many coaches tried to plan their child making and then like not having a son named their daughter to win. That's quite extreme. But when it was Muslim, he's done, loves kind of these life stories, and he believes in kind of destinies, and I think that's what makes him special and kind of a good character, a very charismatic coach. But I think it's very common for high school baseball coaches to be that way. And also, honestly, and so recently in Japanese society, like the man or the husband, the father, it's considered a good thing to dedicate yourself to your job. It's not, and at the expense of your family, but that's been the way at least until 10-15 years ago, and that's changing now. But that's what I wanted to show too, like if you're trying to understand why Japan is the way it is, this is not an exception. And if you've ever done business with a Japanese businessman and you wonder why he works so hard and why he is working on a Sundays, because it's been that way. And and people can take judgments based off of that, have their opinions. But I was also trying to share some insight of like some hints of like, if you've ever wondered why Japan is this way, perhaps these are some of the reasons kind of a approach. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you for explaining that. Ted, I'm going to go to you. Hey, Ted.
Here we go. I got 3 questions. Number 1, what was the most difficult part of making the documentary? And the second question is, what's going to be your next project? And the third question is, any difficulties about being a woman doing this documentary?
Oh, thank you. Great questions. So I would say that there was really nothing easy about the project. I would split the 3 parts that were very difficult. One was to get the permission. So you may or may not know that the high school baseball union runs high school baseball, and there's a reason that this kind of film has not been really made before. They've been very protective, and there's a lot of media about high school baseball within Japan, but to the outside world. And when we first went to the high school baseball union, my husband and I, as an American producer, and me in an independent company, they were just like, who are you? Like, we don't understand like how you want to film and you don't have an outlet yet. So that's why we got NHK involved. It's actually a co-production with NHK so that we could kind of fit into the system, but always telling them like, it's for the outside world. We want to do this internationally, but it took a lot of convincing. And also, even after the film was done, we did something actually quite stupid. You should never do this as a filmmaker, but we didn't know how widely we could release this film until it was done. But there was no other option, and we believed that once we made the film, they would understand the benefits of letting us release it widely, as we've ultimately been able to. But it was a constant process, and it was not guaranteed, so we took a big risk. So that, and then also the filming, I think, imagining 100 days of going between 4 schools in very hot heat, trying to figure out where to be on which day. I mean, mainly Hayato, but just whenever I left Hayato, I would be so scared we would miss something, and just not knowing the outcome, is always making sure we have enough options, at the end of the day, so that I could make a film. This is like my anxiety throughout. And then sitting with 300 hours of footage, and I edited the film too. So for on and off for a year, because I had to make other versions for NHK and I had to do some other jobs as well. But for a year, I sat with this footage trying to figure out the best story to tell. And I actually didn't know Mizutani would be my main character until the editing. That's how many options I had. I didn't know if I was making a film about a high school kid or how it was going to lay out. That was really all in the editing. So that was a very lonely time where, it's just part of the process. But it was, it's not something I've really done before either. I edited other people's films, and then I made this animated documentary as my first feature. So Koshien was a lot of firsts for me too. So there was nothing easy about it, I would say.
Right.
And then my next projects, I mean, COVID, as with everyone's life, kind of threw derail things this year. But And actually, thanks to Koshien, I get a lot of sports offers. You know, there's some potential projects surrounding the Olympics that I might get involved in. But ultimately, what I would really love to do next, if COVID allows, is to next film in a Japanese elementary school. So I went to elementary school, so I really believe between the age of 6 and 12, that people become Japanese. Like a 6-year-old is kind of like an
Right.
American 6-year-old. By the time you're 12, and I experienced that. I'm very American now, but as a 12-year-old, I was very Japanese. And I think for better or for worse, the elementary school really molds you for Japanese society. And so with similar themes to the Koshien film, I now want to get into an elementary school and observe them, how
Oh,
that
great.
happened. That's
I
kind
was
of,
a former teacher, middle school
oh,
teacher,
really?
7th
Yeah.
and 8th grade.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So now 17-year-old boys were tough, but I'm going to now try to do 6-year-olds.
Wonderful.
So and 12-year-olds, like a 1st and 6th grader I film them mainly for a year. So we'll see how that goes. And your third question about being a woman, I think it's really hard for me to know what things were easy or hard because of my gender, but I would definitely acknowledge that I was always surrounded by, I mean, every high school baseball union person, every high school baseball coach, obviously every high school baseball player are all men and boys. And so I think in a way, maybe especially with the boys, I had to really figure out what kind of relationship I should have with them. You know, I was a woman like 10 years older than them at the time, and I was not their friend, I was not their teacher, but I wanted to build a relationship where they, you know, felt comfortable,
Right.
whatever they wanted me to be. And it was also different for different boys. But I think, you know, I can't say for sure, but there must have been an effect that I had, that I was not like a 7-year-old man, you know, like there must have been something. And I tried to just lean into that. And maybe sometimes that made it harder for the boys too, but I just had to figure out things that work. And also, yeah, there was times when I would have a meeting or walk into a room and, you know, be the only woman. And also, like, you know, because my producer was also my husband, and when he was there, that was good. But I noticed sometimes they would want to talk to him more than me and things like this, which is fine. I think there's pros and cons, and at this point, just like other parts of my identity, I just figure out how it works. And I think definitely, though, maybe I could make this film because of who I was versus someone else, whether that was my gender, my age, different, like a combination of like me being part foreign but also part Japanese, different things. I just used all of it to make this film as successful as it could. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't finish. I've been watching the documentary. I'm almost done with it, and I'm enjoying it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ted. Sanjay, I'm going to you. Hey, Sanjay.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hi, Emma-chan. I'm a Canadian Academy alum.
Yeah.
Old man. Very proud of you as a senpai.
Thank you.
Not that I had anything to do with this, but I was curious, did you have any interaction with the team after the movie aired? Have you had a chance to like screen it with them or anything? What was their reaction like? I'm very curious.
Yeah, so in Japan, we released this film from August this summer, so it was in theaters, and also this came about due to COVID. It was never part of the plan, just like with ESPN, it was this total surprise. We were never planning to release this international versions that aired on NHK that everyone had seen already, but this full version, because Koshien was canceled, and they basically said, okay, you can release this film this summer, which is very sudden, but wonderful. And it's still in a few theaters regionally, but in Tokyo it ran for 8 weeks, and in Yokohama too, 6 or 7 weeks. And so yes, we got to meet a lot. We kept in touch with Mizutani and the coach, but the kids, now they're all 20. It's been 2 years, and so all those characters have just come of age, and a lot of them we saw in the theater, and I just can't even imagine if it was me watching myself in this amazing theater. Is kind of like playing back the most intense years of their life thus far. And also even Ryumon was telling me how like, oh, finally I understand a little bit what coach was trying to tell me 2 years ago, like but not fully yet. So I'm sure it also takes time to process, but it's a special thing for it to be played back on a big screen surrounded by audiences that don't know you're there. You know, whenever I did a talk and I knew one of the boys was in the audience, I would acknowledge them and the audience went wild. They just felt like they were like superstars, you know, and felt like they really knew them. And so and Captain and Ryumon are still playing baseball in university. Captain, as expected, is doing quite well, and he hopes to try to go pro. I think that's like his dream still after college. Ryumon not at that level, but he's actually continued, and they're all turning into like wonderful young men, I would say. And then some of the others that aren't in the film too. I mean, it was interesting to see right after they graduated, some of the kids just totally let loose, as you might imagine, and just dyed hair and kind of wild clothing. And but now 2 years later, a lot of them have kind of swung back a little bit too. So it's not like they've, at least the ones that came to the theater. So it was really nice to see them. And yeah, just understanding that, I mean, thanks to them we could do this. And I know, like, for better or for worse, these kids didn't have they didn't like, the coach decided to do the film and they were part of it, you know. But I hope that as their life goes on, they understand, you know, that it was a special time and it being documented in history. Our film was actually released in pair with there's a high school baseball film that was made on the 50-year tournament by Kon Ichikawa called Seishun. I don't know if it's released in English, but it was in 1968. So the guy that made the Tokyo Olympics film in 1964 did a very similar style of film. It's an amazing film. When I first saw it, I was like, maybe I don't need to do this, but I did something totally different. And so a lot of the theaters paired the 50-year and the 100th year. And I think that also helped understand, like, okay, maybe this will carry meaning on in 50 years, 100 years and onwards, which also was meaningful to them, very meaningful for me too.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking my question.
Thanks, Sanjay. Emma, Clark's asking in the chat, just because it's a kind of a follow-up. How about with Mizutani and Sasaki? Do you have any updates on them, or is it status quo, or
yeah. So yeah, I mean, Sasaki actually, we've remained very close, and he, you know, he did a trip to the US last year to kind of learn more about American baseball, and then took his whole team there. And he's really going through a phase where he really wants to learn from American baseball, and I see him kind of swinging like there and a little bit back. I think I know the feeling of like going to America thinking everything's great and then actually realizing to pick and choose after a few years. I think that's what he's doing, and it's very interesting to see him evolve that way. And he still, you know, he remains to be, you know, just one of the best coaches out there, and we'll see if he can actually make it through to the, you know, he's never won Koshien. That's ultimately what I think is remaining on his career. So we'll see. And Mizutani, actually, the biggest update you might be surprised to know is that he stopped shaved heads. The Mizutani stopped shaved heads this year. So the beginning of this year, which 2 years after Sasaki, and as we captured in the film, I think we didn't know it at the time, or maybe we hoped it would be, but it really became a turning point that such a powerful team decided to stop shaved heads. By the following year, 2019, noticeably at Koshien, you could see some of the teams out of the 50 teams not have shaved heads. And then now I'm shocked that Mizutani, who in our film just never seemed to have that, he says, you know, it's now the time for each kid to just think for himself, like, you know, what's the best hairstyle to play good high school baseball? Like, I don't want to impose, was his answer. But I can't help but imagine his own son coming home from dorm with longer hair having an impact, you know. I really think that had a direct impact. So that's interesting. And Mizutani is, you know, it was a weird one. I didn't know for a month if he'd seen the film. Because I always wanted to have a special screening for him. But then COVID happened, and then all of a sudden the film release happened in Japan. So actually we didn't have a chance to show it to him. And then after 1 month, we had interacted about other things because it was helping us get the word out, but he had never told me if he'd seen it, what he thought about it, and I was getting nervous. And actually we visited Tokushima, his home prefecture, saw his mother and sister. And when I saw the sister, I asked her, like, have you heard if your brother's seen the film? And she immediately called him, and he said he apparently has snuck in a screening that I was at to talk, but didn't tell me. And he was too shy, he said, but I mean, I'm sure it's overwhelming to see your film, see your life being played back like that. And he said, like, he couldn't stop crying, and he came to the final day too, and he loved it. But actually the sister, who you might recall being a little pointy in the film, she's like, I haven't cried since E.T. Like, I haven't cried in a film since E.T. and I was weeping, and it made me love my brother, even though I really hated him for a lot of my life. So that was a very personal reaction that made me happy. Yeah.
Wow. And Yuriko, fellow filmmaker, documentarian, is asking about his son. He was a star. Like, I was amazed. He was batting cleanup as a freshman on one of the best teams. So hopefully go ahead.
Yeah, so when I first met him, when he was still in middle school, and he was big kid, very polite and nice, but just kind of a little bit sitting on the couch, like hanging out like a regular kid, and I just didn't know. I still don't know on baseball anything for skills, so I just didn't know if he had any potential, anything. And just the fact that within our filming period, he just became like this star as a freshman, and he did make it to. He continued to do well. He made it to Koshien as a sophomore last year, so he did get a chance to play, although his father, as promised, didn't go. He was like, I'm coaching my own team, and so I actually went and saw him, and it was nice. And then he became this faded year of not having a chance to go for Koshien in the senior year this year. The pros have been interested in him, although I believe he didn't apply to be drafted, and he's going to university, but I think his dream is to go pro at some point. So yeah, I really think that Mizutani has good things about him. He definitely has his flaws, but for me, the fact that he had the insight as a father to send his son away to his most trusted disciple versus coaching him himself or doing something else, I think really is one of the best decisions he's made, and it's definitely paying off. And I think it takes a certain kind of insight to be able to do that, especially if he knew that his son was going to be that good. So I think that's an observation I've made throughout this period.
Yeah, good point. All right, we have a number of people with their hands raised, and we'll start getting through those. Steven, you're up. Steven went to Koshien, so he's got a firsthand experience.
Yes. Hi, Emma. Thank you very much for your film and for meeting us tonight. A couple of things. I have a question for you, but I just want to point out that Ichiro is my hero too. And a few weeks ago, I was in a group meeting. It was a webinar kind of a thing. And one of the speakers was Bill Bavesi, who brought Ichiro to Seattle. And he talked about Ichiro's work ethic. He said for a 7 o'clock game at night, Ichiro would be in the locker room at 10 a.m. and he would begin his routine. That began with a massage. And he had his own personal masseuse. And Bavesi said that massage was violent. And in fact, the masseuse himself broke his own rib one time giving a massage to Ichiro. But he had an incredible amount of discipline, which I absolutely love. But anyway, my question concerns Koshien, and I love your film. I was actually there in 2017, and I wonder if you were the film crew behind me, because I was sitting about 4 seats in front of a film crew. I was along the first base line for the opening ceremony. Was that you?
No, because we filmed in 2018.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and also, actually, despite being the historic 100th Koshien film that was in co-production with NHK, approved by the High School Baseball Union. Despite this, we were still not allowed to film ourselves in Koshien. All the footage from within Koshien was from NHK footage. This is how crazy the rules were. And that's also why we didn't hinge our documentary on the Koshien tournament, like the kind of the behind the scenes, because we weren't allowed and we tried to build our film. So yeah, little known secret was like, no, it's not us, because we weren't allowed to film.
Okay.
We watched.
Well, here's my question. The opening ceremony, which is amazing in itself, because you have all the teams marching into John Philip Sousa music, and then the team, they have a ceremony and all the teams leave except the two that will play the first game. And then over the stadium, a helicopter came flying in, hovered, lowered itself, dropped a parachute with, I think, the game ball at the end of the parachute. And this is my question I find kind of interesting. That parachute was the Japanese Imperial flag, which I found interesting, because the International Olympic Committee did not want to see that flag flown during the Olympics, and they pressured Japan not to fly that flag. I'm just wondering if you know the history of the use of the Imperial flag at Koshien.
Yeah, I don't know the specific reason for that, and I didn't know it was. I mean, his helicopter moment is like amazing. I mean, you have to be there. I think it's really hard to experience it through like there's a helicopter and the ball drops.
Yes,
and it falls to the ground.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I didn't know it was wrapped in the Imperial flag, but there's definitely history or kind of meaning associated with certain parts of high school baseball culture, I think, and kind of old Japan, or kind of the militarist. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, look at, you see the militaristic aspects of it, and it's hard to know fully, and it's kind of a lot of speculation for me too. No one would like answer, but I mean, for example, I would just say it's not a coincidence that like Koshien is held in August, and it definitely always August 15th, the day of the end of the war, is always within the tournament, where everybody has a moment of silence, and whoever's playing that day, and it's all broadcast, and it's just it's like, I think it's associated with kind of all the a lot of Koshien stars who before the war went to war and died. There's like a sad history of that, and I think a lot of former baseball players, now coaches, or people who run high school baseball, always want to remember those experiences on whichever side. It's really hard for me to know fully, but and I think like there's a lot of speculation about the shaved heads kind of always associated with wartime, although it's not a rule. There's no like rule that ever said you must have a shaved head. It's just always been the culture, and maybe an unspoken thing for different reasons. So there's definitely like ties, and I think like maybe and I think that's why I also sometimes get politicized, because some people see high school baseball as kind of like a right-wing cause, and then therefore the left wingers have a problem with that aspect of it. But it's really hard to understand, and I also didn't really get into it because I don't think there's any right answer. But yeah, it's a very sensitive part of that, and I don't know how aware a regular Japanese public person is either. So it's a tough one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Stephen. That might be another documentary to make, the left versus right.
There's a lot of aspects to it, and when we looked at it, there's just like an interwoven. I mean, with everything, I think, and whether how comfortable or uncomfortable it is, it's all the like 100 years ago, or even 75 years ago was the end of the war. So there's so much history that's still tied in, and generations that remember, even if you didn't experience it. Just like in our film, that's what we tried to tie in, like Tsuta, who was a kamikaze pilot that ended up not dying, came back and became a high school baseball coach, much like a lot of other, everybody who survived the war had to do something, whether it was coaching high school baseball, becoming a teacher, or anything else. And that there was a generation that was raised by those people. And then the next generation is Mizutani, who was raised by those people, who has some aspects of very strict, very militaristic beliefs. And then there's Sasaki, who's another generation removed, who understands keeping certain aspects, but really trying to do his own thing too. And then another generation beyond is like me, you know, so it's not that far along. And I think we always have to acknowledge things that have built Japan, but also the understanding the needs, like that we don't have to keep doing that. I think that's also something I tried to explore in the film, because I think society is struggling with that, or trying to figure out what things to keep and what things to change, as Sasaki says so well in the film.
All right. Yuriko says she's going to cover that in her documentary, so you're off the hook.
Great.
Michael, I'm going to go to you a second. Michael, I think, has an explanation for the flag for Stephen.
Yeah, the flag is from Asahi Shimbun, which is a newspaper, and it's also the newspaper that founded Koshien back 100+ years ago now. So that explains why that flag is being used. Although I don't usually see the whole Imperial flag. They usually have it cut out, like a section of it is my impression of how the Asahi Shimbun uses the flag. I think Gabe posted a link to the flag itself.
Yeah, the link that he shared has it cut off, like you explained.
Yeah, but it being cut off like that is the logo for Asahi Shimbun.
Yeah.
So it looks very similar to the Imperial flag without quite being it.
Right.
Also,
I remember. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Also, this book, Imperial School Days in Imperial Japan, this covered a lot of the very early baseball teams in. It was called high school, but it's equivalent to what junior high is now. And how they were run very militaristically, how high school in the very early days, the Showa era, or early Showa era, was very military camp-like. And that's what is slowly being phased out, but what a lot of schools still do. And it also explains the shaved heads and everything.
I remember now that flag. I always saw there was the Asahi newspaper flag, and it is similar. You're right, but and it's weird because Asahi is not known to. They're kind of more known to be actually like left leaning and more liberal. But I think so. I don't know if they're aware that the flag looks like. I'm sure they are, but I don't think that it's a direct connection. It's more like the host of the high school baseball summer Koshien is Asahi, so that must be why that flag is there. But I did remember, and my American cameraman did point that out. I remember being like, "This is Imperial flags everywhere because it's everywhere, not just the helicopter." But I don't know if they're self-aware, or they just like. It's sometimes it's surprising how not self-aware some companies or things are in Japan. So I'm just not sure. Yeah.
Well, its history is the thing. So it was their logo back 100 years ago. So it's still their logo.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I think we covered that one thoroughly. Thanks for that, Stephen. All right, Gabe, I'm going to you.
Thanks, Shane. Hello, Emma.
Hi.
I was able to watch the documentary on Japan Society. Thank goodness they offer their services across North America as opposed to just in the US. So grateful for that. My question's around something you brought up, how you weren't able to film in Koshien Stadium. So I was curious what your contingency plan was if any of the teams you focused on actually won Koshien. I know there's been a history of teams focused on documentaries actually going and winning the whole thing. Like I'm thinking specifically of Stephen King and Stuart Onan writing a Red Sox season chronicle in 2004 when they reversed the curse, and then two authors trying to pull the same stunt to will the Mets to a World Series in 2005, which didn't quite work as well.
Yeah, we throughout were trying to ask for like a special like exception or something should one of these teams make it to Koshien, so that we had access within the stadium. But there's also very strict rules about even outside of the stadium, you know, in the hotels, and there's rules. You can't film the teams outside the stadium during certain times in certain places. So we knew we could film that, like the practice before a game that's not at the stadium, or certain hours at where they're staying and things like that. And we always had this idea to ask for, you know, pleading like that, you know, been filming every day since this March, and now they're at Koshien, let us kind of follow. But it didn't really come to that, I would say, because Hanamaki also lost in the first round. And we did film with the Hanamaki team around those days when they were staying in Kansai. It just didn't make the film. And one trick that we knew, because there was such a strict regulation, not just in the stadium, but outside the stadium, people lining up and different things, all that footage was from NHK, but there is a shrine that we actually is in the film. So right next to the stadium, there's like a Koshien shrine, where at this point it's like the mecca for all thing high school baseball, or Hanshin too, because of the location. And we realized that within the shrine, we had full permission. We could, as long as the shrine was okay, which they were, to film whatever. So we did try to lure some Hanamaki parents, as you saw, into this shrine area. I mean, they were going to go anywhere, but we wanted to make sure. And we did a few interviews of parents that aren't in the film, but we used the shrine space to do as much filming as we could, because that's the only space we had for, and then everything else. And it did help that I could, without a camera, be behind the scenes and observe things too, whether it was just the press circus that happens after a game, when the coach and one of the players popped up on this like stand and they have to do interviews, and it just kind of looks like a zoo, honestly, with like a human higher than everyone. And just being with especially the Hanamaki team in those moments after, and what it feels like even to lose, even if you've made it to Koshien. So that helped me, because I think ultimately when you can't film something, like as the director, I just absorb everything, and you know, and I have to feel confident when I'm making the film that, like, based on everything I saw, which I tried to see as much of, I'm now distilling it into 90 minutes to show to people that weren't there, whether they, you know, weren't at Hayato, weren't at Hanamaki, weren't in this moments, to share some truth, you know. So when I can't film something, that's all I can do. And I definitely feel like that helped me inform what to film after, with Sasaki running and different scenes that we filmed after their loss and things like that. So yeah, I mean, you really fight for access, and we got a lot, but that was our plan. And but we also knew, so we didn't, like I mentioned, we there's a way to make a film where you can plan, you know, you just have to film, you have to make a film out of what you can film, which is also why Hayato was so good, because it just let us be there every day. But like you couldn't make a film about the Koshien stadium. We knew that, so we planned accordingly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Gabe. Keith, I'm going to you next. You gotta take yourself off of mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it Ema? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Emma.
Ema. Okay. Really enjoyed the documentary.
Thank you.
I guess I was personally struck. There was the one scene where Mizutami is driving at night, and he talks about at times losing his sense of confidence. I was curious if you had a feeling that he felt alone, you know, even though he's surrounded by his family and surrounded by his players at school, if he was, you know, in that, you know, what did you find him trapped in that traditional mold, and did he feel a sense of aloneness, is my first question.
Yeah. Oh.
My second question is, I'm just curious, the great disparity between how many times, you know, Sasaki's been to Koshien 10 times and Mizutami only once. Do you personally have any insights into that? Do you attribute it to the difference in their styles, the old versus the new? You know, are there differences in their prefectures in terms of their resources of each high school, or the competition that each faces in its prefecture to account for that? I was just curious.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like high school baseball coach. I mean, Mizutani, of course, but it's a very lonely profession. And I assume a coach in any case is to a degree is that, and maybe like an American college football coach, like the kind of the pressure that any professional coach, except the difference is like a high school baseball coach is like first and foremost a teacher, and they get paid like a teacher. They don't getting paid millions, or it's really just for the love of it, and they don't get like they all have to be a teacher first and then a coach, and it's a very strict rule like that. And what I felt more than anything, and especially on that in that year after, when I was looking through footage, like because when I was filming, I was so attached to the players, the kids, and I was like kind of like, you know, one of them trying to make it to Koshien and very emotional about their ups and downs. And it took me through going through the footage to really understand the pressures and pain, and looking back at the spring when Mizutani was putting on a strong face, you know, and I think he truly believed he really wanted, I mean, every year he wants to go to Koshien and believe that in a miracle that would happen. And I'm sure we added to that pressure on him because we're filming. But seeing the cracks in his facial expressions, even in the spring, maybe not knowing that I mean, even in the best year, it's very hard to make it to Koshien from Kanagawa. There's 200 teams. So really hard, but just realizing that, and then just the way he just lost so much weight after that loss. And you know, until recently, 2 years later, I really felt like he was not the same person. I think that season really broke him, and I saw it in real time. And especially that day when we went home with him, which was actually a few days after the loss. I know it was very soon after, but it wasn't the day of, because it took me a few days to convince him that we have to film him in the state, which who wants that? Like, it's a really hard thing to ask, and it was a thing to accept, to be filmed in such devastation. But I, again, like with Sasaki and you know, for the future of Japanese society, you have to find a way to know what you need for your story, and to explain that when we've been filming every day, you know, from the spring, how much he wanted this. We have to film how devastated you are to convey how devastating it is, or you're just going to seem like, you know, if we just film you again when you're okay. Like,
I really felt for him. I just oh.
And it took me a few days to be able to get in that car with him to go home. And yeah, just total. And that continued, you know, I mean, but the new team starts, and at school he has to put on a brave face like so quickly that the next day after they lose, the new season starts. And that's was my big realization. Like, for these kids, it's a once in a lifetime thing, and they move on, and you see they hang out on the beach, you know, and you can get a sense maybe of their life is ahead of them. But for high school baseball coach, he's done this for almost 30 years now, and the obsession that makes him do that, I mean, I would not do it. Like, I would not do what he wants, but he's almost trapped in it with this eternal desire to go to Koshien, even though he's been once. You know, he just can't get enough of it, and I don't think he knows how to be the other way.
Do you think he will ever join his family's business?
I told his mother this summer, because she's like 85 now, and she seemed to still hope for that, and I'm just like, I don't think he's coming home. No, I don't think so. But it's also, yeah, realizing that he had these other options, and broken promises to also his not just his immediate family but his parents too. That's how much he's been, and that's why I think he's worthy of being the main character of this historic 100th year tournament, even though he didn't win Koshien, because he captures so much of, I think, why, you know, the good and bad things about, you know, why this culture is so prominent in Japan, you know. So I really think he just captured all of that. And your second question about, first of all, yeah, it's definitely, depending on the prefecture, your chances of going to Koshien is really different. I mean, Iwate, I think, had 60 teams, and Kanagawa has almost 200. And the 100th year, they had 2 teams could go from Kanagawa, but usually it's 1. So you have to win like 9 times to go through Kanagawa, whereas in Iwate, I think it's 5. You know, and so that's a big difference. And then just the level of talent. So Sasaki gets the best kids out of his region. He, by policy, doesn't recruit from outside the prefecture, but that's okay because he gets the best. Whereas in Kanagawa, Hayato is like you know, maybe the 10th to 20th best school in the prefecture, not the first. And so all the local kids will go to the best schools. And then also there's other schools that are recruiting from across the country, like Yokohama High School, for example, which is always had those biggest obstacle. They just recruit the best kids from across the country. Then Hayato doesn't have a dorm, so they just kind of get these players who are not the top, but not bad. I mean, going to Hayato is actually very difficult, and you have to be pretty good. But so they're always the underdog, and within that, they have to figure out a way to go. And so yeah, and then I think it says something that, you know, in this 100th tournament where Mizutani said is his report card, he ends up losing so badly. You know, he hasn't lost in the first round in 17 years. That also says something about his style. That's something that was working previously. He went to Koshien in 2009, and I'm sure he was a very similar kind of coach at the time. Like, isn't working anymore. And I didn't have to say that explicitly because the results showed that. And so, yeah, there definitely must be a thing about the times and the kind of kids that are coming up now in the 21st century. Is no longer the post-war period, and what that means, like he can't produce the results he used to, and I think that's really also devastated him, and that's why I think he's trying to change. He's, as he said, and with the no shaved heads, and if you go to see Hayato play now, maybe there'll be some things different, but I think also at the heart of it is he can't change. I mean, how do you change? Like it's not very, and I think that's relatable maybe to an older generation who's being forced to, you know, society has like, you've always been this way, and then society like now is not appropriate to be a certain way or do certain things, and that's bad. Things are bad, but how I really empathize to like now we expect these people to change, and how that is very hard. So I see all of that. I saw all of that in him, and maybe again, the best he is doing is passing on to his son the different options, or like his disciple taking, you know, Sasaki taking what was good about Mizutani, but also expanding on other things.
Thank you, Emma.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Keith. All right, Tom, you're up next. Tom is our local Koshien expert. He was there for the 100th one too.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I coach baseball here in the U.S. and hoping to move to Kobe next year and hopefully study high school baseball a little bit more. What do you think the U.S. could learn from Japanese high school baseball, or should learn from Japanese high school baseball, and vice versa? I mean, what could they learn from America, or do you think they should learn from America?
Yeah, I think I just think that the history of baseball and what significance high school baseball has in Japan and the US is quite different. As I'm sure you all know, like, you know, in the US, like baseball started as, you know, the pro league started first. It was kind of this thing that people in town started. Whereas in Japan, you know, it was very specifically brought by a teacher to Japan, first in the university level and then in the high school level. And it was a student, there was no such thing as sports at the time. So baseball was categorized as a martial art and incorporated into education, youth education. It was a student activity that was supposed to mold your character as well as play baseball. And that's why Koshien and high school baseball has a much longer history than Japanese professional baseball that only started in the 1930s. So the mentality of what high school baseball provides, and that's why you do it 360 days a year for many, many hours a day, not necessarily to be good baseball players, although I guess all kids wish for that, but by the time you're in high school, you know that only one person on your team might have a chance to continue at a high level. Yet for Hayato, 129 kids join the club, and most of these kids will never play a A-team game. You know, there's B-team games, but otherwise you're designated to cleaning the grounds and sweeping the lockers and cleaning the toilets. Like all of it is part of your training, and people still think it's valuable, like because ultimately the relationships you build and then the way you're groomed to like dedicate yourself to whatever role that you're assigned is translatable skills within in Japanese society. At this point, because baseball, high school baseball is much stricter than other sports in at the high school level. I've heard there's like companies that prefer like a former high school baseball player to be hired there's like slots for them versus for other types of high school kids, because they know they can expect a certain kind of person. There's that kind of an advantage. But I feel like in America, like no one is really, I don't know, they're not playing high school baseball to like get a good job or something. Like I feel like they probably want to play baseball and they're good athletes. They probably play other sports, you know, like in different seasons. Like none of that exists in Japan. So I feel like, but I think like, you know, in Japan, high school baseball is very much a team sport. It's to the point of detriment where you do everything as a team. So if there's a good hitter, the hitter has to do fielding and everything else. It's not like a program just for that guy. Versus I feel like in the US, like if there's like a star hitter, that person just has to like, the coach will like make sure he's a good hitter and they can maybe go pro. So it's just a different mentality. I mean, I do think that the team aspect and the idea of like doing as you're told as a basic before questioning things. I mean, all of this reflects onto society, right? I feel like even with COVID, and I think when the ESPN showed our film, like on Twitter, there was like some comments about how like, oh, like we should follow rules like Japanese are doing. Look, in Japan there's like very little COVID, and just is like different how like people as a culture, you know, and kind of consideration for the group. Like in Japan, we wore masks before COVID if we were like had a cough, not for ourselves, but to make sure we weren't passing anything to everyone else. It was just the basic mentality, because it's such a sacrifice for the group mentality that's shown in high school baseball and then in society. And the flip side of that is like, yeah, there's less entrepreneurship, less, you know, I would say generally than the US, and there's less kind of individuals that go out too strong, get beaten down sometimes, way more than in America. But it's like the hand of the, you know, the front and back of the same hand. I think these things go hand in hand. And yeah, if you observe different, like the US high school baseball way and Japan, there's good things and bad things, and I think it must be somewhere in between that's like the best, and that's what I've tried to do with my life. And so I think always the key question is, so which are the best things? And whether it's for baseball coaching or how society should be or how we should live, or in different industries how we should be thinking, like I think what I tried to do in the film is start these conversations and think about it, and I have no idea what the answer is.
Just one other quick question. You said Mizutani and Sasaki, they work at the school. What do they teach, or what's their role outside of baseball?
Yeah, so they're both history teachers. So in high school baseball, my understanding is that to be a coach, you have to have a teacher's license, and you have to basically actively be in. You can't just like come to practice. Like you have to have a role. Be it their load is probably not as strong as like they don't have like 50 classes a week or something, but they have to teach. And in terms of Mizutani's case, he's actually one of the vice principals too. And I think that comes not because he's like an exceptional, like his role is because he's a high school baseball coach, and the impact he's brought to the school over his time there has like landed up in this role. So, but they're both Japanese history teachers, and I really tried to film them teach, but that didn't happen. They were too. I'm assuming they're better high school baseball coaches than Japanese history teachers. That's my guess, but I never saw them. But they were very reluctant to show that part of themselves to me. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. All right, Ellie and Shelley, you're up next.
Yeah, Shelley's going to ask the question.
All right.
Hello. So I'm just going to say how much we totally enjoyed the documentary, and I love the sort of the way you really illustrated all we love about baseball, but also really brought in kind of the culture that we always find ourselves as people, you know, in where we have the sort of good things we're trying to do and the kind of bad things that come about because of the culture in some sort of way. But my question for you is really, if we could just like turn the lens onto you for a second, as if we were the documentary, and I would like to know what you are most proud of in the film that you made, and maybe what you wished you had done differently, if you had any thoughts on that, looking back on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud that this film exists. I feel like it's just like it took a lot of resilience from beginning to end, to just from like getting that first permission through to getting the film out in the way we were able to, and yeah, just like sweating and crying throughout it all because it's so hot, and I was so emotional about it all. And there were times when like I couldn't see, like when Hayato lost, like I just remember being in shock because we just weren't expecting them to lose in the present, but yet I had to. And the cameraman was quite upset too, but especially him, I was like, you have to keep filming. I mean, he knew, but like I had to keep filming, like, and I just was able to do my job in this hysterical state I was in, trying to keep it together, but also being like, we have to, because I always think like throughout this film and throughout everything I do, I keep being like, it's not enough for me to feel this thing. Like my job is to capture it so that other people who weren't here can feel it. That's like what always drives me. That's what makes me, you know, get up whenever I need to go film this thing that may or may not ever be seen. But there's like, if there's a chance of something interesting that happening, we just have to, the more we're there, the more possibility. And so that is what keeps me going, when at times you just might want to be like, oh, today nothing might happen, so we won't go. But there was never that. We were just, I was so, because anything could happen at any moment, and I just was very driven. And I guess I'm proud that like I had that attitude versus just like, yeah, and in hindsight, we probably could have taken some days off, but we wouldn't know which days that would be. So there's that. And yeah, I think figuring out, again, like now, having made the Koshien film, and then also having made my previous film, which is again a very different film, I feel like I'm up for anything. Like the range I've been able to do between the two films, and even since Koshien, I've had a few other projects and shoots, and people complaining it's hot, or I'm just like, there's nothing hotter than that summer of 2018. And I just know how to handle things. I think it's going to be like the basis of my strength as a filmmaker moving forward, that we got that done despite the odds, and despite, again, so many uncontrollable outcomes, and like figuring out Seatta's story that hopefully was compelling. So I'm very proud of that. There's always things like, you know, it's always about like what I regret, or what I always sometimes remember, like things I couldn't capture, especially with Sasaki in the early days, where in front of my eyes, amazing moments of high school baseball coaching, or meanings of life, like things that I took as a person, but I was not able to share with everyone because for whatever reason we weren't filming, whether the trust wasn't there yet, or I couldn't like negotiate in the right way to be rolling at that moment, and we lost those moments. And I have them in my memory, but you guys don't get to see it. And these things are like, and there's a lot of those, and they're endless too. So for me, it's always in like, you know, it almost hasn't happened if I haven't captured it. Like that's how I have to approach everything as a filmmaker. So yeah, there's always more things we could have done, but I think, you know, I don't like lose sleep over that anymore. I did for a while, like, but this as endless things, and hopefully as I move on in my career, I'll just get better and better at this craft, you know. So
you really did. Just all the contingencies you captured so that you had options just really impresses me. But I know Ellie has a question too.
It's a comment. We're totally looking forward to your film on the elementary schools.
Thank you. Yes, I will do my best. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I got to put on.
Thanks for the question. All right, Ian, you're up.
Hi, Emma. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah. So I have 3 questions. So you talked about this earlier, and in the movie, you talk about like Japan changing, and that started with Commodore Perry in the 1850s, and it's happening now. Like, do you see that growth, that change happening exponentially over these last 20 years? The second question is, do you have any plans to try to make a documentary about Ichiro that's just more than your Ichiro project? Like, have you tried to reach out for him? And third, were you surprised that Shohei Ohtani said that he sucked this year? And yeah, he had an interview and he said that he sucked this year, and it was like I've never seen him been so forthcoming. He kind of took off that robotic veneer that he puts out, and I hope your grandfather's doing well.
Thank you. So you may or may not know that I met Ian in Seattle last year, and he was one of the subjects of my Dear Ichiro series, the way I featured Ichiro fans in Japan and the US. So I feel like Ian is like an opposite of, we're like the same age, I think, an opposite of me, where he also like Ichiro came to Seattle when he was like 10 or 11, and that triggered all this interest in Japan, which is like just another wonderful impact that Ichiro has had. And I'm like the reverse, because Ichiro made me interested in the US. So, you know, very, very interesting that way. But
You make me look much smarter than I actually am. So thank you for that.
No. It's a great piece that you can check out. But so, sorry, your first question was, can you remind me? I remember the second and third, but oh, you're muted.
Like changes in Japanese society.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when Perry came, you know, I wasn't around, you know, but I think in terms of just I think, well, COVID has like totally, I mean, I don't know what this will change now. We'll see in a few years. But until then, like when I was making the Koshien film, it was so much about hatarakikata kaikaku that I don't know what the English word is. It's like there's basically a lot of discussion about changing the way we work. So like new laws were being discussed because so many people were overworking. And you know, I mean, Japan is known for its like overworking death rates, and suicide rate is just really, really high. And there was just a movement to like change that. So they were like, you know, you can only work a certain amount of hours a day, and it was really, which like basic things that America has, like we just didn't have. And I really thought that as a parallel to high school baseball is always like, it's too extreme. Like, do we really need this in this day and age? It's like so hot, and you know, like we need to put the kids through this. And there's a lot of criticism about that too, even though it's always been that way. I mean, always being that way is not a good reason to continue it, but a lot of things do it that way. But I just felt like an intense discussion about both these things going into the 100th tournament. But what I think we have to acknowledge is when the 100th tournament came about, despite those criticisms, it was the highest attended Koshien ever. And the ratings on TV were the highest in, I think, 20 years. And we went wild for Yoshida, who was the pitcher from the Akita school. That was, you know, the small public school that was runner-up in Koshien that year. And he threw 1,500 pitches over the course of the regionals and Koshien. And he was the hero. Like, and yet, of course, there's always like criticism and discussion and, you know, putting down the pitch count, which is a serious issue. But just like the contradicting nature of, you know, the discussion and then the outcomes of the general public. I'm sure the people who are criticizing are still critical, but just how it ends up being the dominant thing in society still. So, and changes are happening, you know, there's like pitch count rules in high school baseball and just different considerations to make the sport less extreme. But I think what's really difficult about high school baseball is like the extremity of it is what makes it so significant in our culture. I mean, high school baseball without being extreme is not going to be the same at all. And I think it's almost like, I feel like we have this mentality, like, you know, I always say that I think Matsuzaka, who you must know, you know, won Koshien and threw his arm out basically doing it. You know, it doesn't matter to a Japanese person that he didn't do as well in the majors as we'd hoped. Like, we always remember him from that 18-year-old boy that gave us like a lifetime of inspiration that summer at the sacrifice of his arm probably. But it doesn't, that's kind of like, and a lot of these kids I think are at the sacrifice of inspiration for a country, you know, and that's how it is right now. And that might not be fair, but I also think a lot of kids know that, and that's what they also want to be a part of. And so it's a very difficult matter. And someone who loves high school baseball, I understand there's issues that are problematic and they need to change, but it's very difficult to like, at what point does the essence of the sport and the culture start to erode too? And that's the balance. And I think the people who have that job have a very difficult task at hand, and it's really easy also for like us from the outside to criticize the union or criticize the coaches, but it's actually very difficult. How do you educate the next generation in an appropriate way is always the question at hand, and seeing it firsthand, like I don't know the answer, I just know it's really difficult. And I think in each of our fields, like if we're all not teachers, like each job we have, those questions are at hand, like how do we keep what was good but also change? And that's like a topic I'm really interested in. But I think there is, even in the 3 years I've come back and spent more time in Japan, just there's a lot of new conversations about like that happening at an expedited rate, I would say, even if it's about like, I don't like same-sex marriage issues and things like this that were like not part of dialogue, and now like we're still very behind compared to the US, but different social topics are, you know, even like, yeah, different things that I didn't hear about at all when I was growing up is happening. So yeah, I think, and then being a filmmaker, I think a lot of fellow documentary filmmakers in Japan are all about criticizing Japan and kind of whether it's the government or different aspects of society and like hoping for change, which I think is important. But thanks to those people, I also feel like I'm not kind of advocating for that. I also think there's so many things about Japan that are so wonderful that the Japanese don't realize or take for granted. So that's one more what I've been drawn to, and I wanted to acknowledge in Koshien those basic wonderful things like the helmets being in line and the like kind of being parallel to like the people queuing up in society. Like, love it or hate it, high school baseball exists this way. That's why Japanese society is this way. And so maybe if high school baseball is less strict or changes in a certain way in 20-30 years, when those boys are in positions of power in society will be different. Maybe the trains would be a little bit less on time, you know, like a couple of minutes late. And maybe that's not a big deal, but just pointing that out, that you might have these changes you weren't expecting because you wanted this thing to change so much, and just that everything's connected. And that's kind of what I wanted to pose in the film, because that's what I feel, that change is okay, but not like blanket change. And we have to really think about what kind of changes, you know. So about the Ichiro documentary, I would say at this point, since middle school, when I found my baseball, which is filmmaking, and then I kind of started to pursue this path of being a filmmaker, I think it's only natural that at some point my ultimate goal in life became to combine, you know, what inspired me to be this anyway and make an Ichiro documentary. So that was my dream. That has been my dream. I think I would now say, you know, a dream seems really far away, and a goal, I say a goal now because goal seems a closer thing that it could be attained. It's not up to me, you know, it's up to him. But I feel like I am that's going to be my goal, and I'm gonna not rush it, keep preparing for if that opportunity arises, whether it's now or in 10 years or 50 years, to be available to make the Ichiro film, that, because I do think there needs to be a film that like my great grandkids can watch, you know, and know about him. And I don't know that exists. That doesn't actually exist currently, despite all the footage that's available in the world and the fact that he's alive and well now. So that's something I want to do, but I think I'm being very careful about, you know, just being preparing as Ichiro would want me to, for that great at bat if I ever get that chance. And finally, Otani. Yeah, I think, yeah, I guess I was also surprised that he was so open about how he was feeling, but I think we can also, I mean, it was clear he was struggling, and I think we're just like all rooting for him so much, you know, I mean, at least I am. And I think I mean, the fact that how he is in public, I really think is a big lesson, what he was taught by Sasaki. You know, Sasaki had Yusei 3 years before Otani, and then Otani. And Sasaki at the time was in his early 30s. Like, this thing happened to him. Like, Yusei came and 200 media circus followed him, and then he had to learn on the job. And then by the time Otani came, Sasaki had a much better idea of how to handle such a star player, not just skill-wise, but the media. And I think he really taught Otani to have his guard up, to really, you know, so that he didn't have to get hurt. Because I think a lot of things happened with media relations that Sasaki regretted, that he couldn't take care of as well with Yusei. And so but I think for fans, that makes Otani like a little bit, we wish he would speak more candidly, or we want to know what he's feeling more. And hopefully as he gets older and he knows how to handle things, you know, he will give us some more insight, because I think that's what we want as fans, right? And I also think we hope he will do better. And I would say I did get a chance to interview both of them. I know Otani and Yusei, and I know I had this luxury of interviewing Otani for 30 minutes and then using like 3 seconds of it in the interview, because I think ultimately what I realized was no matter what he said to me about high school baseball 6 years later, which was when we interviewed him, the footage I found of him that I do use in the film of him in the moments after he lost that last game, it just was way more powerful. Like, I mean, when I found that footage, it just kind of trumped everything that he said, although it was wonderful to meet him. So just, I don't think we'll ever see Otani crying like that in public. But there was a time when all he wanted to do was make Sasaki proud and make it to Koshien for his community, you know, and I think that's a nice side of him to remember.
Thanks, Ian, for those questions. All right, we got one more to sneak in here. Yumi, you're up.
Hi, Emma.
Hi.
Actually, I met you like several years ago. I saw your monk in Japan. Yeah, I'm friends with Mari, and so she talked to me about the monkey, films and all that. And so, congratulations on your being a filmmaker through, your accomplishment. It's really, really wonderful. And I did not know that you moved back to Japan until this film. I thought you were still living here. But anyway, so now, like, you talked a little bit about Ichiro prior to this, the question, but I just read the article, the news saying Ichiro is probably can be the coach for high school. He got a license. And do you think there is a chance for Koshien too, and be Ichiro featured in that?
Yeah. So yes, I also saw the news. We knew earlier this year that he took this test to have the authority to coach amateur baseball, meaning high school or college, or which you have to do if you've been a professional. And then he went silent for most of the year, and then he's like recently emerged last week, I think, and did a long interview and hinted that he wants to not be like a full-time coach. I don't think he means like take a job like Mizutani and then do that for the next 30 years, but like not just being a coach for a day. I think there's something in between that he hinted, and we're all very excited. And yeah, I guess like in a perfect world, that would be, I would feel like, I now even feel more like that I'm up for the job, and I just hope that he knows I exist, and if he's interested that I'm on, considered. But yeah, whether it's that or, I think we're all curious what he's going to do next. And I think maybe he's also not known, like he's had a year to, especially with COVID, to think about what he really wants to do. He also mentioned that he's in better shape now than he was like when he was a player. He can throw the ball faster than he did. Like, so he's clearly, still at the training, and part of me is like, yeah, hoping somehow he will be, we just want to see him, right? Like we want to see him play or do something. So but if I could film that would be amazing. I mean, you saw in this Koshien film that his high school is in the film. And that was not a coincidence. We went to many schools, but it made sense also because I was trying to push the US audience, like make it attractive for the US audience, this film. But yeah, going there and kind of tying him in the hopes that he will he will see it one day. So we'll see.
Yeah, I hate to say that, but I have kind of like bump into him one time in the street, like my neighborhood, and I have a bunch of friends who saw him at the soba noodles, shop or somewhere when it's like while he was in the Mariners and while he was in New York, and I wish I could tell you where to spot him.
Yeah, no, at this point, I would say upon doing that Ichiro fan series that I did last year, I feel like I've graduated being a fan, because I can no longer, he used to bring me pure joy, just by existing, and now I've like incorporated into my work. So I don't think I'll even be satisfied if I just spot him, although that would be great. Now one day want to like, present myself as a candidate for a documentary about him. So that's kind of like my goal now. So we'll see where that takes me.
So you're grown up.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And keep up a good work. And I'm really looking for your next project and more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yumi. All right, so that's all the questions. Thanks so much for answering all those so thoroughly. I'm gonna have to watch the YouTube again just so I can. There's so much there, but so much good insights and interesting stories. So yeah, thanks for being so candid and for your work and for sharing your time with us. Really appreciate that.
No, thank you. It was wonderful to talk to everyone, and I hope to be back to just listen in on some of these other chatter ups you do.
Yeah, we'd love to have you, and you're part of the family, and any way we can help you. Well, maybe we can try to find a way to help you make that documentary happen. That'd be the most epic documentary. An Ichiro documentary needs to happen. But yeah, thanks again. I'll let you sign off, and I know you have the day in front of you there in Tokyo. And if everyone else, I just need you for a couple more minutes for a couple announcements. And Emma, you're welcome to stay on if you want, but you have the green light to sign off.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Emma.
He was excited.
I took a chance.
All
He was
right.
excited to see something new.
All right, so that was fun, everyone. Thanks for all your questions. I just wanted to say a couple things before signing off here, considering this is the last Chatter Up of the year. So we started this in May. I'll give Jessie, my wife, credit for coming up with the idea. When sports were canceled, I just wanted to do something with our community. And the original goal was to give people a platform to talk sports when there was no sports, and also to have a little bit of a diversion with all of the uncertainty and negativity going on. So I think we accomplished that goal. And the thing that's been really cool is that despite the fact that sports did return, and I'm sure everyone has a little bit of Zoom fatigue, I know I do, people continue to show up. I think we had close to 40 people on today, and a lot of you have come every time or maybe only once or twice, but I appreciate all of you all the same for joining. It's really been an interesting year, and not the best year to take over a business that relies on international travel and attending live sporting events. So doing these chatter ups has given me some purpose and something to look forward to every couple of weeks. So yeah, thank you all for your participation. This isn't going to be the end of it, but I don't plan on doing it every couple of weeks in 2021, maybe once a month or so. And so hopefully you'll still be able to join us, and we can still connect digitally, but more importantly, hopefully we can just go catch a ball game together next year, whether in the States or obviously abroad to hopefully one of the many destinations that we're going to. So thank you all again.